ينشر الهدي إيمانا وموعظة فبالجهالة قد خابت مساعينا. غابت مناقبنا واسود حاضرنا غابت مناقبنا واسود حاضرنا وأوشك اليأس أن يغشى أمانينا.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ahlan wa sahlan wa marhaban bikum. The pleasure is all mine. Once again, it's a Friday evening and we get an opportunity to talk to each other for about an hour or so. You can hear what I'm talking. I can't hear what you're talking unless you are going to email me or send me a message via Facebook and Twitter. But nonetheless, it's a kind of engagement, and let's hope that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala puts barakah in this discourse. Even if you're not talking to me verbally, but you should be talking to me from your heart as I'm talking to you, absorbing what I'm saying, internalizing what I'm saying, and then either agreeing with it or disagreeing with it. Hopefully, you'll be agreeing with it most of the time, or more so than you would be disagreeing with it. Is the glass half empty or half full? Is the glass half empty or half full? That's a very old expression, you know. There's two ways of looking at it. You can either look at a glass that's got water halfway up as half empty or half full. You can look at it from a positive perspective, it's half full. It's not full, but it's half full. Or you can look at it from a negative perspective and say it's half empty. My wife showed me a WhatsApp message that was doing the rounds this week, and it was something that I had seen sometime in the distant past, but it's such a profound reminder of how we should approach life. I don't know if it's a true story or it's a hypothetical story, but either way, the lesson is great. So I'll share it with you as an opening thought, as an opening remark to this evening's program. They mentioned there was this man, and he was sitting down at the end of the year and making a few notes. So he wrote, "This year has been a very tough year for me. It's been a very challenging year. It's been a bad year, to be honest. Firstly, I had to go for an operation to remove my gallbladder. First thing. Second thing, I turned 60 and I had to leave the company that I enjoyed working at after 30 years of service. Thirdly, this year my father died. Fourthly, my son met up in an accident. He was hospitalized. As a result, he failed his medical exam, not to mention that my car is a total wreck." So his wife came and she saw him, he was making these notes and he was deep in thought and he looked very depressed and he looked very down and he looked very despondent. So she peeked over his shoulder, she saw what he had written, she stepped away, she went to another room, she took out a blank piece of paper and she started to write, "This year has been a very good year for me. I finally got to remove the gallbladder that was causing me so much of pain. I retired from a company where I had worked for 60 years, but now I have more free time to be able to do the things that I love. My father passed away, but he passed away at the age of 95. He had lived a long and a rich life, and he had no serious ailment. He never was at any stage in his life dependent on anyone. My son met up in an accident. It was a serious accident. However, there was no serious injuries. He spent time in hospital, but there was no disability and there was no permanent long-term consequence of that accident. Although as a result, he missed his medical exam and couldn't pass the year. And at the same time, he wrecked my car. So this year has been a very good year for me." The same incidents, the same episodes, the same issues. But she was looking at the glass half full. He was looking at the glass half empty. I'm not saying that in our lives we must try and turn every negative into a positive. Sometimes there are big negatives in our lives. But too often, and most times, in most instances, we can look at the thing from a positive perspective. We can look at an issue with a positive slant. But what do we end up doing? We end up looking at everything from a negative perspective. We end up looking at everything from a negative perspective, and it wears us down. Emotionally and psychologically, it wears us down. And it deprives us of the enjoyment of life. It deprives us of happiness. It deprives us of contentment. It deprives us of enjoying the smaller things in life. Appreciating the mundane things in life, that which we may deem to be mundane, but which play a big part in ensuring that a person is happy. So there's no perfect life. There will be no perfect life because this is not a perfect abode. When we go to Jannah, inshallah, and may Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala grant us all Jannatul Firdaus, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam has encouraged us that do not only ask Allah for paradise, but ask Him for the highest stage in paradise, Firdaus, Salillah al-Firdaus. So may Allah grant us the highest stages of paradise. There will be perfect. There will be a perfect situation. There will be a perfect life. Everything will be perfect. But right here, right now, there can be no perfect life, and you have to appreciate what you have, and you have to try and appreciate the positive in whatever negative is thrown up to you by life. Otherwise, you'll be one person that's always miserable, that's walking around with this grumpy look, this frown, as if you have a constant grumble and a constant fight with life. And that's no way to live a life. That's no way to live a life. And that's why people these days are so depressed, and people are so down, and people are so despondent. Try and look at the positive. Focus on the positive. Where there is genuine negative, deal with it, but try and move on. Life has to move on. May Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala grant us the understanding. Now, coming up this evening on the program, we have our normal format. Next week, we will be having a guest, inshallah. We will commence with our dua for the week. After that, the second segment, we're talking about upbringing of children. That's in our Hadith segment. Then we move on to verse 11. That's the final verse of Surah Duha in our Tafseer segment. Then in our Seerah segment for this week, in the previous week, last week, we spoke about Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam's name Ahmad and the meaning of the name Ahmad and some detail behind that meaning. Today we talk about 5 famous names of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. 5 famous names of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Then in our marriage segment for this week, we are appealing to men that spoil your wife. Spoil your wife. And I want to open the lines later in the program. We are coming to you live this evening from our studios in Sunnah. It's a live program. So I want to open the lines a little later at about 9:10 or so. And we want to ask men out there that share ideas on how to spoil your wife without breaking the bank. We know that things are tough economically these days. It's all about budgets, and it's all about electricity prices going up. They're talking now about a 2 rand increase in the petrol price. That would include all the tariffs, I would assume. Or has that already taken effect? I can't even remember, in the beginning of March. So it came down, in a big way, but now it's going up in a big way once again. Then there's Eskom wanting 26% from July increase. So I know things are tough. You may not be able to spoil your wife in a way that she would like to be spoiled, or even in a way that you would like to spoil her. But what are effective ways of spoiling your wife, meaning treating her every now and again without breaking the bank? I'm sure there are husbands out there with 1 or 2 interesting thoughts, suggestions, experiences in terms of what has worked for them. And then finally, our Sunnah for this week. We are still discussing the Sunnahs of entertaining a guest. And this week we'll be talking about how to bid farewell to your guest. How to bid farewell to your guest. As always, we would appreciate interaction from your side. I will open the lines, as I said, for the marriage segment a little later. But start giving it thought from now. Effective suggestions on how to spoil your wife without having to break the bank. Give it thought from now, so that when we open the lines, you can call in. And also, you can communicate with us via SMS, via email, via Facebook, via Twitter. Whatever you prefer, the details will appear on your screen regularly. We go for a break. When we come back, it's our dua segment, our supplication segment for this week.
عن ابن عباس رضي الله عنهما عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فيما يرويه عن ربه تبارك وتعالى قال إن الله كتب الحسنات والسيئات ثم بين ذلك فمن هم بحسنة فلم يعملها كتبها الله عنده حسنة كاملة وإن هم بها فعملها كتبها الله عنده 10 حسنات إلى 700 ضعف إلى أضعاف كثيرة وإن هم بسيئة فلم يعملها كتبها الله عنده حسنة كاملة وإن هم بها فعملها كتبها الله سيئة واحدة.
Welcome back. We move on to our dua segment for this week, our supplication for the week. Let's do a quick recap of what we discussed last week. It was a hadith narrated by Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiyallahu an, recorded in Kanzul Ummal. Allahumma ahfadni bil Islami qa'iman. Oh Allah, protect me with Islam while I am standing. Wahfadni bil Islami qa'idan. Protect me with Islam while I am sitting. Wahfadni bil Islami raqidan. And protect me with Islam while I am lying down. وَلَا تُشْمِتْ بِي عَدُوًّا وَلَا حَاسِدًا. And let not an enemy or a jealous person take delight from my plight. Allahumma inni as'aluka min kulli khayrin khaza'inuhu biyadik. O Allah, I ask you for all the good whose treasures are in your hands. وَأَسْأَلُكَ مِنَ الْخَيْرِ الَّذِي هُوَ بِيَدِكَ كُلِّهِ. And I ask you for that good which is totally in your hands. That's the supplication that we discussed last week. And I explained last week that, O Allah, look at the wording here. Oh Allah, protect me with Islam while I am standing, while I am sitting, while I am reclining. To be within the parameters of your deen is actually to fortify yourself. In the deen of Islam, in the teachings of the deen of Islam, there is protection, there is hifadat. Going beyond the parameters of the deen, that's when you become vulnerable. And a very important dua, in the supplication that we discussed last week, وَلَا تُشْمِتْ بِي عَدُوًّا وَلَا حَاسِدًا. Oh Allah, let not an enemy or a jealous person take delight from my plight. There are always ups and downs in life. There are always these fluctuations in life. But when I want to down, when things are going south, let it not be that my enemy is there to take delight, to rub it in, to rub salt in my wounds. No, Allah, my enemy will not be there to assist me and say, okay, this person is going through a difficult patch, let me assist him. No, that person would want to actually rub my nose in it. Now, the dua for this week, narrated by the great Sahabi Anas bin Malik radiyallahu an, recorded in Majma' al-Zawaid. Allahumma la tada' lana dhanban illa ghafartah, wa la hamman illa farrajtah, wa la daynan illa qadaytah, wa la hajatan min hawaij ad-dunya wal-akhirah illa qadaytaha ya arhamar rahimin. O Allah, do not leave any of our sins except that you forgive them. Nor any of our worries except that you remove them. Nor any of our debts except that you discharge them. Nor any of our needs from this world and the year after except that you satisfy them. O the most merciful of those who show mercy. So if we look at this supplication, let's take it sentence at a time. Allahumma la tada' lana dhanban illa ghafartah. Oh Allah, do not leave any sin except that you forgive them. Every sin, major, minor, intentional, unintentional, past, present, future, every sin, forgive it, O Allah. You would see the supplications taught to us by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They contain, most of them contain this theme of seeking forgiveness. We're sinning all the time. We're sinning all the time, and that's unfortunate. So we need to be seeking forgiveness all the time from Allah. وَلَا هَمًّا إِلَّا فَرَّجْتَهُ. No any of our worries except that you remove them. Financial worries, emotional worries, psychological worries, spiritual worries. Remove all our worries, O Allah. Let it be that you take care of whatever is it that's making us worried, whatever is making us anxious, whatever is making us frightened. You take care of it. وَلَا دَيْنًا إِلَّا قَضَيْتَهُ. And no debt, no any of our debts except that you discharge them. At times people have to be burdened with debt. They just don't have the capital to start a business. They don't have the money to purchase a house. They don't have the funds to get a vehicle. So when you are in debt, you turn to Allah and you say, Allah, you make it possible for me to discharge the debt. وَلَا حَاجَةً. Now we become more comprehensive. وَلَا حَاجَةً مِنْ حَوَائِجِ الدُّنْيَا وَالْآخِرَةِ إِلَّا قَضَيْتَهَا. And let there be no need of ours, a worldly need or a need of the year after, except that you satisfy them. Let there be no need of ours, a need of this world or the year after, except that you satisfy them. Whatever I need in this world or whatever I need in the year after, Allah, you take care of those needs. So a very comprehensive sentence towards the end of the dua. And then we conclude with praise. Ya Arhamar Rahimin. O the most merciful of those who show mercy. O the most merciful of those who show mercy. Subhanallah. praising Allah wa ta'ala by His attribute of mercy so that we can draw from His treasures of mercy. So this dua talks about forgiveness, it talks about alleviation of worries, it talks about removal of debt, and it talks about seeking from Allah the fulfillment of all worldly as well as the spiritual needs. And all of this is not beyond Allah's capacity to deliver, because He is the most merciful of those who show mercy. اللهم لا تدع لنا ذنبا إلا غفرته ولا هما إلا فرجته ولا دينا إلا قضيته ولا حاجة من حوائج الدنيا والآخرة إلا قضيتها يا أرحم الراحمين. That's our dua for this week, narrated by the Sahabi Anas bin Malik radiyallahu an, recorded in Majma'uz Zawaid. When we come back from the break, we move on to our hadith discussion for this week.
فبالجهاد بنى الإسلام قوته كاليأس أن يغشى أمانينا.
Welcome back. Now we continue with our hadith discussion. A quick recap of the hadith that we discussed last week. It was on the theme of the reward for looking after a daughter. The reward of looking after a daughter or daughters. The first hadith we discussed last week was narrated by Abdullah bin Abbas. He mentions that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam had said, ما من مسلم له ابنة فيحسن إليهما ما صحبتاه أو صحبهما إلا أدخلتاه الجنة. No Muslim who has two daughters and he treats them well as long as they live with him or he lives with them, except that these two daughters will cause him to enter into paradise. You have two daughters, don't look at them as a burden. Don't look at them as not a wise investment, because you're going to bring them up and then they're going to go to somebody else's house and benefit somebody else. No, these are your children. These are your gifts from Allah wa ta'ala. Treat them equally, like you would treat your sons. Invest in them. It's a great investment. It's your ticket to Jannah. Your daughter can become your ticket to Jannah. We discussed the hadith from Tirmidhi last week as well, narrated by Anas bin Malik radiyallahu an, where Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, من على جاريتين دخلت أنا وهو الجنة كهاتين وأشار بإصبعيه. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam had said, if anyone brings up two girls, he and I will be together in paradise. We'll be together in paradise as close as these two fingers. وأشار بإصبعيه. The Nabi of Allah indicated with his two fingers here, with his index finger and his middle finger. The gap between the two is very small, meaning you won't be able to be exactly on my level in Jannah, because I am the greatest of Allah's creation, the noblest, the most virtuous, but you'll be very close to me. So your daughter is not only your ticket to Jannah, your daughter is your ticket to a very high level in Jannah, very close proximity to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Then we discussed a hadith from Bukhari last week as well. من يلي من هذه البنات شيئا فأحسن إليهن كن له سترا من النار. That whoever assumes the responsibility of managing the affairs of his daughters and he treats them well, then these daughters will become a shield for him from the fire of Jahannam. These daughters will become a shield for him from the fire of Jahannam. And so not only is she your ticket to Jannah, your daughter, but she's also your protection from the fire of Jahannam. And then we concluded last week also with a narration from Tirmidhi, narrated by Abu Sa'id Khudri radiyallahu anhu, that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam had said, من كانت له ثلاث بنات أو ثلاث أخوات أو ابنتان أو أختان فأحسن صحبتهن واتقى الله فيهن فله الجنة. He who has three daughters or three sisters or two daughters or two sisters, and he treats them well and he fears Allah when it comes to them, for him is Jannah. For him is Jannah, subhanallah. So whether it's your sisters, perhaps your father has passed on, perhaps they got divorced or they got widowed and they had to come back, or your daughters, it's never easy after you've been a queen in your own house to come back and be a princess, even if it's in your mother's house, or even worse, in your brother's house, because he's got his own queen, his wife. It's never easy. We're not trivializing that. We're not saying it's going to be smooth sailing. We're not saying it's going to be all easy and hunky-dory. But what we are saying is that as the man of the house, as the brother or as the father, if you treat them well, and if you ensure that you do your utmost to bring them up before they get married and to look after them, if circumstances are not favorable and they have to come back, it's your ticket to Jannah. There's great reward, it's your ticket to Jannah. Now our hadith for this week And Ayyub ibn Musa rahimahullah an abihi an jaddihi radiyallahu an anna Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam قال ما نحل والد ولدا من نحل أفضل من أدب حسن. Ayyub rahimahullah narrates on the authority of his father, who narrates from his grandfather, that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, no father gives his son any gift better than good education. No father gives his son any gift better than good education. And here it's mentioned in the father-son sense, but it refers to parent-child. There is no better gift. There is no better gift that you can give your child than good education. Today, what we fail to realize is that we feel we need to give our children all the material comforts. We need to give them whatever their heart desires. Many times you would hear parents say, when I was growing up, my father didn't have much. So much of what I wanted, I wanted a particular type of techie, I wanted a particular type of jeans, I wanted a particular type of watch or whatever it may be. My father couldn't afford it. So I grew up all the time not getting what I wanted, and it had an effect on me. So Allah has given me a lot of wealth. I want to give my children whatever they please, whatever pleases them, whatever they desire. The greatest gift you can give them is a good education. Good education. Now, generally we understand good education in the context of sending them to a good school, to a good university, ensuring that they have a good degree, and then they have a good profession which will earn them good money. That's how we generally understand it, and there's nothing wrong with that understanding. Going to a good school, getting the best education that you can for your child, so-called secular education, or knowledge of the unrevealed sciences, that's fine. But why is it that that which is more important, that which has to do with the everlasting life of the hereafter, that which has to do with them living their lives as Muslims, living their lives in a way that's pleasing to Allah, fulfilling the basic tenets of their deen, knowing what their deen wants from them, what their Allah wants from them, what kind of life they are expected to live, beyond just the basics, beyond just the average. You're not satisfied with average education for your child in terms of this worldly life. And how long will your child live? By the time they've gone through their childhood and adolescence and the study period and getting married and getting settled down, already 25, 30 years is gone. The average lifespan is 65, according to the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So what happens then? For 35 years, you invest so much in education that will benefit them for 35 years. Nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing wrong. Not only is there nothing wrong with it, for the right reasons, it's meritorious. It's something that needs to be done. So it can benefit your child, it can benefit your progeny from beyond your child, and also it can benefit the community and the ummah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam via their expertise. But revealed knowledge, knowledge of Quran, knowledge of Sunnah, is not only for scholars. It's not only for those who dedicate themselves to that pursuit. Every Muslim needs to try and know as much of their deen as they possibly can to become a better Muslim, to become a better flag bearer of the deen. Therefore, many parents deprive their children of maktab education. Then you say to your child later on in life, now you're not looking after me. You're dumping me in an old age home. But you never gave them an opportunity to learn the value of what the rank of a parent is. Marriage. I give this example all the time. You sit your daughter down the day before she gets married and you say, hey, now you're getting married now. You must control your tongue. You sit your son down and you say, no, now you're getting married. You must control your gaze. But you never gave your child that education. You never gave your child that tarbiyah, that upbringing. So that advice will be advice on the eve of their wedding. But it's very, very unlikely they would be able to implement it if they were not given that education from way before, and that education was not implemented in their lives from way before. So a holistic education is what this hadith is referring to. Knowledge of Islam, revealed sciences, unrevealed sciences, that's the best gift that you can give to your child. Yes, if you can give your child a house, and you can give your child a car, and you can give your child a good wedding, and you can give your child good holidays and all of that, it's a bonus. But making sure your child is educated, especially from a religious perspective, is the greatest gift that you can give your child. How many of us are giving our children that gift to an adequate extent, to the necessary levels? It's something to think and ponder about. So Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam has said, مَا نَحَلَ وَالِدٌ وَلَدًا مِّن نَحْلٍ أَفْضَلَ مِنْ أَدَبٍ حَسَنٍ. No father gives his son any gift better than good education. No father gives his son any gift better than good education. When we come back, we move on to the tafsir of Surah Duha.
فبالجهاد بنى الإسلام قوته اليأس أن يغشى أمانينا.
Welcome back. Now we continue with the tafsir of Surah Duha. وَالضُّحَى وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَى. Last week we discussed the 10th verse, the second last verse. وَأَمَّا السَّائِلَ فَلَا تَنْهَرْ. As for the beggar, do not drive him away. As for the beggar, do not drive him away. And we explained that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam is indicating, or rather Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala is indicating to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam that listen, you were financially also in dire straits. You grew up on the back of great financial difficulty, and Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala eased it for you later in life when you married Khadijatul Kubra radiyallahu anha. So don't forget your own past. Be generous when it comes to beggars. And there are many hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam which talk about the virtues of giving beggars, which talk about the virtues of acknowledging them, of being kind to them, etc. And we explained last week that if you cannot give, firstly, don't think you have to give, in large amounts or big quantities. Whatever you can manage to give. Aisha radiyallahu anha used to give 1 or 2 dates, if that's all she had at that particular time. However, if you cannot give anything, if you are not certain about the beggar's condition and whether this is a professional beggar or whether this is a genuine beggar, then rather just don't give, but let there be kind words. Do not rebuke them. Do not run them down. Do not degrade them, just in case you're wrong. Just in case you're wrong. We explained last week that Allama Alusi rahmatullah alayhi had said that yes, if the beggar is becoming, insolent, the beggar is becoming belligerent, the beggar is becoming rude, and they just don't want to go, and it's like those beggars that you get at the robot and those that you get that hassle you and irritate, then you can be stern to the extent that is required. You can be stern and firm to the extent that is required because the beggar is being stubborn. But if the beggar is not being stubborn, be kind. Say a good word. Rather than giving charity and then giving them a whole lot of insults after that. Yeah, you lazy, and why don't you find a job and this and that. Then rather don't give. Rather than don't give. قول معروف ومغفرة خير من صدقة يتبعها أذى. Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala says, rather say a good word than giving charity and then hurling abuse. Rather say a good word than giving charity and hurling abuse. So وَأَمَّا السَّائِلَ فَلَا تَنْهَرْ. As for the beggar, do not drive him away. Do not drive him away. And we explained that the word sa'il could even refer to a questioner. That if you're a teacher and the student comes to ask you a question, if you're a scholar and a person doesn't have knowledge, comes to ask you a question, then do not drive them away. Yes, if they're being really inconsiderate, some people phone you at odd hours, I can tell you, odd hours, odd times. Then very politely, and if they still don't want to back off, then firmly but politely, you need to tell them because, scholars also have their routine, they also have family lives, they also have to rest, they also have their own, their own itinerary, their own program. But as far as possible, don't drive them away. Try and assist people who have queries, who have knowledge-related issues that they need clarification. Now, we move on to the last verse. Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala mentions, وَأَمَّا بِنِعْمَةِ رَبِّكَ فَحَدِّثْ. As for the bounty of your sustainer, make mention thereof. As for the bounty of your sustainer, make mention thereof. So here the scholars write that Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala wants us to make mention of the bounties that He had conferred upon us. تحديث النعمة وأما بنعمة ربك فحدث. You would hear sometimes people saying that I'm not saying this to boast, but I'm saying this, as an acknowledgement of Allah's favors upon me. تحديث النعمة. Meaning that Allah has blessed me with this, or Allah has blessed me with that. Allah has blessed me with multiple opportunities to visit Haramain. I thank Allah for that. The lesson I've learned that, a person mentions the bounties of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala upon him. So Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala is mentioning to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam that mention the bounties of Allah upon you, especially that bounty where you were looking for the ultimate guidance. وَوَجَدَكَ ضَالًّا. We found you wandering, فَهَدَى, and we guided you. We found you wandering and we guided you. So now, تحديث النعمة. Say to people, I was looking for ultimate guidance and Allah gave it to me. Now allow me to pass it on to you. So for example, if a person was a non-Muslim and they accepted Islam, or they were living a life totally in contradiction to the teachings of the deen, and then Allah gave them hidayat, as we say, and they changed their lives. So now to mention that as tahdith and ni'mat, as reflecting, as acknowledging the bounty of Allah upon you, that you know what, my life was one of pubs and clubs and drugs and women and you know, being intoxicated and being high, and Allah changed my life, and today I'm in this position. So allow me to engage with you so that I can share that experience with you, and hopefully it will motivate. That's tahdith and ni'mat, acknowledging the favors of Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala upon you. We should be very careful, however, that our nafs does not dupe us, and the devil does not beguile us into thinking that we're acknowledging the bounty of Allah upon us, but at the same time, we in reality, we're just showing off. Yeah, you know, I mean, I don't want to, this is an acknowledgement, this is tahdith and ni'mat. I've got a house in Paris, and I've got a house in India, and I've got one apartment on the beach, and I've got one in Clifton, and I've got one there, and I've got one there. In reality, you're boasting, but you're camouflaging it as acknowledging the bounty of Allah upon you. What does it mean to acknowledge the bounty of Allah upon you? Tahdith and ni'mat. Malik bin Nadar radiallahu anh mentions that one day he came in the presence of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam with poor quality clothing. So the Nabi of Allah asked him, tell me, do you have wealth? He said, yes, I have wealth. The Nabi of Allah said, what types of wealth? He said, oh, different types of wealth. I mean, I've got livestock, I've got cows, I've got sheep, I've got goat, I've got different things. So then Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, if Allah has conferred His bounties upon you, He would like to see the effects of that bounties being manifested. If Allah has granted you wealth, why don't you wear decent clothing? Why don't you wear good clothing? If Allah has given you the wealth, why don't you drive a decent car? Why don't you eat good food? If Allah has given you the wealth, why don't you live in a nice house? It's not simplicity. It's not asceticism, you know, to wear tattered clothing, to wear dirty clothing, when Allah has given you beyond that. If Allah hasn't given you, that's understood. But if Allah has given you, wear the best that you can wear. But don't be extravagant. Don't start now showing off. It doesn't have to be the uppermost quality, but wear good clothing. So you show the bounties of Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala upon you. That's the meaning of tahdith and ni'mat. And times to highlight a particular point, you can make mention of a favor of Allah upon you. When Abdullah bin Salam was trying to reason with those who had surrounded the house of Uthman radiallahu anh, those rebels, then he told them certain favors of Allah upon him, that I was the first to accept Islam when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam came to Medina, and the Prophet said this about me and that about me. This tahdith and ni'mat was so that his words could have more impact. So there has to be a valid and a justified reason, and in that context, you make mention of the bounties of Allah upon you, especially the bounties where after you have received it, you can now assist others, like hidayat and guidance. But we should not use that as a license to start bragging and boasting. That brings us now to the end of the Tafseer of Surah Duha. That was verse 11. We make dua to Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala that He grants us the tawfiq of making amal. It's a surah that's recited often in Salah. We also recite it often. Many know it by heart. And we hope that by going through just a very basic translation and tafsir of the surah, when we read it, we will have a better understanding. And we should open authentic books of tafsir, consult the scholars, which are the good books in the English language, and read through the translation, familiarize ourselves with the translation of these verses that we recite often, so that when we recite it or we hear it being recited, we have a greater appreciation for what is being recited. May Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala grant us the understanding.
فبالجهاد بنى الإسلام قوة اليأس أن يغشى أمانينا.
Welcome back. We move on to our Seerah discussion. But before I get going with the Seerah discussion, let me remind you now that in our next segment, which is the marriage segment, the lines will be open. So we're opening the lines from now in order to allow our producers to take the calls and line them up. The number is 011-086-1100 or 7700, sorry, 011-086-7700, and the number will appear on your screen. The question we are asking, we are talking about men spoiling their wives, treating their wives, and we're asking the men out there that what effective suggestions do you have on how you can spoil your wife or treat your wife without having to break the bank, without having to spend thousands of rands, especially in times when economically people are struggling. So what are your thoughts? What are your suggestions? The lines are now open. You can begin calling so that the producers can do their work whilst we are busy with our Seerah discussion. Now last week we spoke about Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam's name Ahmad, and we said Ahmad means the most laudable person, the most praiseworthy person. And Ahmad could also mean a person who praises Allah the most and the best. A person who praises Allah the most and the best. and it's a title that fits perfectly with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Nobody has ever praised Allah like the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has. No other ummah has praised Allah like this ummah has. And this ummah has been given the name of Hammadun, those who glorify Allah Ta'ala excessively. Then this ummah was granted Suratul Hamd in the Quran Kareem. Then this ummah has been instructed to glorify Allah with Hamd. Then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam will be divinely inspired to glorify Allah with certain praises on the day of Qiyamah to get the process of reckoning started. He will be granted the Maqam Mahmud, the rank of praise. He will be granted the Liwa'ul Hamd, the banner of praise. So you can see Hamd and praise is something which is central to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his ummah. And also what we discussed last week was that when things conclude, then you conclude with the praises of Allah Ta'ala. There are many verses in that regard. So you look at many Quranic verses like Subhana Rabbika Rabbil Izzati Amma Yasifun wa Salamun al Mursaleen walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. You look at many Hadith. Quranic verses and Hadith teach us that words of praise are expressed at the termination of something. So by including Hamd in the name Ahmad and Muhammad, it's an indication that the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his coming is the termination of that entire chain of prophets, that entire chain of Anbiya alayhimus salatu wasalam. So we've discussed the name Ahmad and we've discussed previously the name Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now in Bukhari and Muslim there's a hadith where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, I have 5 names. I have 5 names. I am Muhammad, I am Ahmad, I am Mahi, I am Hashir, I am Aqib, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then gave an explanation to these 5. Muhammad, Ahmad, Mahi, Hashir, and Aqib. These 5. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had many other names, but these 5 were the famous names. Now Muhammad we have already discussed, Ahmad we have already discussed. What's the meaning of Mahi? Mahi is one who obliterates. The Prophet ﷺ obliterated kufr. He obliterated disbelief. He brought the light of belief, the light of Iman. Hashir, Hashar. It means resurrection. You know, people will be resurrected at the feet of Rasulullah ﷺ. It could either mean that he will be the first person to be resurrected. This is mentioned in the Hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He will be the first to be resurrected after this world has come to an end and after everyone, including the angel of death, have tasted from the cup of death. Or it could mean that he would be the leader of everyone on the day of resurrection. Hence the name Hashir. So Muhammad, Ahmad, Mahi, Hashir. The 5th is Aqib. Aqib means one who comes at the end. So it could be that the Prophet ﷺ is known as Aqib because he comes at the end of the chain of the prophets. In one hadith it is mentioned, أَنَا الْعَاقِبُ الَّذِي لَيْسَ بَعْدِي النَّبِيِّ. I am Aqib, after me there is no prophet. I am Aqib, after me there is no prophet. Meaning that I am the seal of the prophets, the Anbiya alayhimus salatu wassalam. Imam Malik rahimahullah says, Aqib is a person upon whom the chain of prophethood comes to an end. So that's the meaning of Aqib. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam came to an end. So these were the 5 famous names, and the greatest and the most famous of all is the name Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And as we explained in the beginning, Allah had made it such that no one from amongst the Arabs ever thought of naming their children Muhammad. No one. And that's why when Abdul Muttalib said to people on the occasion of the Aqiqah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam that I'm going to name my grandson Muhammad, many were surprised and said, what name is this? Our forefathers never used to keep this name. Yes, amongst the Banu Israel, amongst the Jews of the time, very close to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's birth, because they saw that in their books there was this prediction that the Prophet Muhammad would come, is the last prophet, his name would be either Muhammad or Ahmad. They had actually come and settled in Medina, waiting for him to come, and they knew the time was very near, so they had started naming their children either Muhammad or Ahmad, but none of those children who were named Muhammad or Ahmad ever proclaimed prophethood. But from amongst the Arabs, no one had named their child Muhammad or Ahmad prior to the birth of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. May Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala grant us the understanding. Okay, we go for a quick break, but we remind you the lines are open. When we come back, we move on to our marriage discussion. We would like to know from men out there. Come on, don't be shy. You don't need to go into too much of graphic detail or personal detail, but just general ideas and suggestions. What ideas do you have? What suggestions do you have on how a man can treat his wife, can spoil his wife without having to spend too much money, without having to break the bank. We discuss that when we come back from the break. The lines are now open. We look forward to your calls.
عن أبي عبد الله النعمان بن بشير رضي الله عنهما قال سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول إن الحلال بين وإن الحرام بين وبينهما أمور مشتبهات لا يعلمهن كثير من الناس فمن اتقى الشبهات فقد استبرأ لدينه وعرضه ومن وقع في الشبهات وقع في الحرام كالراعي يرعى حول الحمى يوشك أن يرتع فيه ألا وإن لكل ملك حمى ألا وإن حمى الله محارمه ألا وإن في الجسد مضغة إذا صلحت صلح الجسد كله وإذا فسدت فسد الجسد كله ألا وهي القلب.
Come on, men folk out there, don't you have any suggestions? Don't you have any tips? Don't you know how to treat your wives? How to spoil your wives? Or is that the problem? Is that the problem? Last week we spoke about drawing the balance between your mother and sister on the one hand and your wife on the other hand. And we said, you grow up 20, 25 years seeing how your mother does things, how your sister does things, and that becomes the norm for you in terms of how women should do things. And then you start judging your wife by that standard, and that's not right, because your wife has her own style, her own way of approaching things. Give her own space. Having said that, it doesn't mean now that once you get married, you must totally ignore your mother or your sister, especially your mother. She's the woman who gave birth to you, nurtured you, brought you up. So even if the relationship is strained between your mother and sister and your wife, you still need to keep in contact with your mother. You need to fulfill your responsibilities towards your mother, irrespective of the state of the relationship between your mother and your wife or your sister and your wife. Now, today I want to talk about this, spoiling our wives. Buy them a gift every now and again. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, tahaddu tahabbu, that when you give gifts, mutual exchange of gifts increases love. Women should also buy gifts for men. Then now and then, plan a secret holiday. What's wrong in planning a secret holiday or a weekend getaway or at least a meal together? Surprise her by cooking for her, on a Sunday, on a Saturday, or over a holiday, providing you know how to cook. Otherwise, you'll create such a mess in the kitchen. She'll say, you know what, hold it. You're doing me a greater favor, not by trying to do it, than by doing it. So, if you know how to cook, but I think you get the drift. She also deserves to be pampered. She also deserves to be spoiled. Sometimes we as men feel, well, she's got the credit card. I don't stop her from spending. She's got her own car. I don't tell her no for anything. Yeah, that's all on its place. It's all on its place. But at the end of the day, she likes to be pampered. She likes to be caught by surprise. Women love these things. Men sometimes don't understand. Even if you don't buy her something or do something for her that involves money, just call her. Call her during the day. Catch her by surprise. I don't need anything. I haven't forgotten anything. I didn't remember to shout you for something. No. I'm just calling you to say I miss you. I'm just calling you to say I love you. If you cannot call, right, then SMS her, WhatsApp her. We need to understand, men folk out there, we need to understand that these things mean a lot to women. They mean a lot to women. So whether it is taking her for an afternoon ice cream, or taking her for a cup of coffee, or giving her a foot massage, or spoiling her with a spa treatment, or taking her away for a holiday, or taking her away for the weekend, or buying a small gift for her, surprise her, woo her. Many times when you're courting, even though courting is not permissible in Islam, then you do everything to try and impress the woman. You do everything to try and, make her feel that you are the most romantic person. But then that romance just evaporates. It just goes. It's gone after marriage. And that's sad. It's really sad. Sometimes we take it for granted that we love each other and that we're there for each other. What don't I give my wife? You would hear some men arguing. The whole house she runs. The whole budget she runs. I drive the other car because I'm driving up and down to work every day. So I drive the cheaper car. She's the one who drives my car. She's the one who drives the better car. She's the one who's got the credit card. She buys whatever clothes she wants. All of that is good. And for all of that, Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala will reward you. For all of that, Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala will reward you. But in the end of the day, you need to ask yourself the question, what's stopping me from surprising my wife every now and again? What's stopping me from giving my wife a gift every now and then? What's stopping me from spoiling her, from pampering her, from treating her? Nothing is stopping us. That's the reality. Absolutely nothing is stopping us. It's either that sometimes people are too stingy, but in most instances that's not the case. It's just that we don't have time to even think about that. We just take it for granted. It's simple taking for granted, and that is unacceptable. It's not a good enough excuse. It's just that we take it for granted. So we make dua to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala that He grants us the ability to treat our wives as they ought to be treated. It brings us to the end of another edition of the Sulaiman Ravat show. I hope that what we have said is beneficial. We make dua to Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala that He accepts and that He grants firstly the speaker as well as all the viewers out there the ability to practice, to implement and to pass on, to propagate. We hope you have a great week. If Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala has willed, we will meet again next week, hopefully with some guests, and hopefully if it gets confirmed with regards the launch of something very interesting, very pivotal, very relevant and very needed in the Muslim community in South Africa, in the political space. I'll give you a hint. That's coming up next week, hopefully. It's almost confirmed. And yes, remember, look at the glass as half full, not half empty. From myself, Sulaiman Ravat, until next time, fi amanillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
فاستنهضي همما فالمسجد الأقصى ما زال يدعونا ندي على الفتية الأحرار في زمن أضحى به الحق بالخذلان مدفونا فبالجهاد بنى الإسلام قوته وهل لغير القوي الناس يصغونا رباه هيئ لنا من أمرنا رشدا فأنت من بالتقى والدين يهدينا أدعوك يا أمتي فاستنهضي همما فالمسجد الأقصى ما زال يدعونا ندي على الفتية الأحرار